Chairman, thank you. Mr. Ratcliffe, I enjoyed and appreciated our conversation in the office. I particularly appreciated the indication of your transparency with this committee, your forthrightness, telling us the truth. It's been difficult from time to know what the true story is, and there are opinions about truth, but we ought to be trying to find the truth. I want to ask you about statements that you've made. I agree with you that China is the greatest threat facing our country. I rate Russia as our second gravest threat and believe it's the most acute threat today. Will you describe the scope of the threat as you see it and the importance of countering the Kremlin?
The question, the threat from Russia?
Threat from Russia. So you indicate China is the first greatest threat.
Absolutely. So Russia is very clearly an adversary of the United States. The threat, of course, is a country with a very large nuclear stockpile. The thing that separates the threat from Russia from China, in my mind, and why I put them, even though we include them in the great power competition, is that the United States is the largest economy in the world. China's the second largest. Russia has an economy that's roughly the same size as my home state of Texas. So what that means is that the Russians have to decide where they're going to compete with the United States. And so they've chosen areas like hypersonics and other areas, but that comes at a cost. And I think we saw some of the cost in terms of their troop readiness as they engaged in their aggression against Ukraine. So a dangerous, lethal adversary who, in many respects, is because of the limitations that I've talked about, has focused on areas where there are great equalizers, and one of those is cybersecurity. So countries that can't compete with the United States in terms of kinetic firepower across the board, which can do so through cyber means. In other words, and we see that with Iran and North Korea and other countries who can't compete with us kinetically, focus on cyber means to cause us harm. Russia certainly falls into that category as well in terms of where a lot of their focus is, and my assessment of them in terms of the malign activities that they take across against the U.S.
Certainly, invasion of another country has significantly complicated the security of our allies and perhaps the United States. Let me point out that you're the first Texan I have ever met that belittled the state of Texas. In your answers to the committee's questionnaire, you state regarding Russia that you believe, I'm quoting you, believe that we cannot let our adversarial relationship boil over into unintended wars. And you go on to say, I will advise the President when there are opportunities to work toward mutually beneficial outcomes with Russia. You did not make a similar commitment for China, Iran, or North Korea. What's the difference?
I don't recall the context of the question why there would be a difference. For instance, I think what I was referring to there, Senator, was for all of the things that I talk about in terms of Russia as a threat and the things that where they challenge us with malign activity, there are areas where we, for instance, countering terrorism, some of the same threats that we face from terrorist groups are threats that they face. And so there are occasions where information or intelligence can be shared or things can be done in our mutual, to the mutual benefit of our countries in those types of things. That would be true with China as well. I think President Trump's approach from a policy standpoint is to not look for conflict with anyone, including our adversaries, but to provide a strong deterrent effect to their malign activities through America's strength, through peace through strength. So I think Iran may be different in the sense of it is a terrorist state, a terrorist regime, or had been designated by the Trump administration, and so I would put that in a different category.
In addressing the importance of analytical objectivity and speaking truth to power, you state that as the DNI, you represented the IC's analysis to policymakers faithfully, including dissenting views, even when the full analytical picture was unpopular. Could you give me an example?
Sure. In connection with the 2020 presidential election, assessment was made as to whether China was trying to undermine President Trump's reelection efforts, and there was a split between the community. A majority opinion was that China was not doing that, wouldn't do that for a number of reasons. The minority opinion was that they were. I agreed with the minority opinion, but what I did was not try to substitute my judgment for the community. I wrote a dissent that would be public, and people could see the reasons for that. And in the process, supported a whistleblower, one of our leading cyber officers, in support of that position. I will say that 15 months later, FBI Director Wray held a press conference talking about the exact things that I was saying China had engaged in that they were doing. And so the opinion that China would never engage in those kind of activities proved to be false, and I think that my dissent aged well.
Not only did you speak out against the majority, but you turned out to be right. Thank you.